Even though this is an in class, it's so much like the others we've done, I've decided to do a video on it instead of us actually working it in class. So let's look at this note here, or bond, excuse me. On February 1st, year 1, Tenity issued 8% bonds dated February 1st with a face amount of $900,000. The bond sold for $817,194 and mature on January 31st of 2020, year 21. The market yield for bonds of similar risk and maturity was 9%. Interest is paid semi-annually on July 31st and January 31st. And the only difference between this and some of the others we've worked is the fact that it's dated sort of an offset. It's not a December 31st payment. So what that's going to mean is that December 31st we'll actually have to do an interest accrual on this bond instead of making the interest payment. So let's talk about this bond. So prepare the journal entry to record the issuance by Tenity on February 1st. So the first thing we're going to do is issue the bond, and just like before, we're going to receive cash at the bond's price, $817,194. Then we're going to go ahead and I like to record the bonds payable next. So we're going to hit the bonds payable for the actual face amount, and that's $900,000. Now, was this bond issued at a discount or a premium? Well, the price is less than the face value, so this was a discount. So we're going to do a discount on bonds payable there. And we're actually going to record the discount for the difference between the $900,000 and the $817,194. So when you do that, you end up with $82,806. So $82,806. Whoops. There we go. So that's the amount of our discount. Now that will be amortized again over the life of the bond. So that brings us to the next date. Prepare the journal to record interest on July 31st of year 1 at the effective interest rate. So again, July 31st, we're going to do our interest payment. Now this is just like we've done before. We're going to debit interest expense, and we're going to credit the cash payment. Again, interest expense is calculated by taking the carry value, and at this point the carry value is $817,194, and we're going to multiply that by the effective rate. So the effective rate on this bond was 9%, and it's paid semi-annually, so we're going to divide that by 2. And again, we're going to round, so our interest expense would be $36,774 rounded. Then we're going to calculate the cash payment. Again, the cash payment is always calculated taking the face value, so we're going to take the $900,000 face value, multiplying by the stated rate, and again times 6/12, or we can simply divide by 2, and that gives us $36,000 cash payment. So the difference between these two would be the discount. So we're going to go in, and we need a credit to the discount to amortize it. So discount on bonds payable, we'll go in and hit for $774, the difference between the two. Again, it makes sense because remember, our bonds are paying 8%, but they have to be priced to yield 9%. So since we're pricing the bond to yield a higher rate, our interest expense will always be higher than our cash payment. All right, now here's where the issue falls. Between July 31st and January 31st, when this actually pays interest for the next payment, we will actually cross a year end, which means we will have to produce financials. Remember, when we cross a year end, we must make sure that all the journal entries are up to date and all the revenues and expenses are recognized in the proper time period. So we're going to have to go in on December 31st and do an adjusting entry for this bond. Now, instead of accruing 6 months worth, we only need to accrue 5 months worth. We need to accrue August, September, October, November, and December's interest, so 5 months. So just like before, we're going to hit our interest expense. Now, instead of doing interest, or cash, excuse me, we're actually going to do interest payable because we're not paying the interest until January 31st. So go here, and we're going to do interest payable instead of that cash. All right, now to calculate the interest expense, it's the same formula. You take your carry value times your effective rate times time, keeping in mind that this is only 5 of the 12 months possible. So we're going to go in. Now remember, the carry values changed slightly. It started at $817,194, but then notice we amortized a little bit of that discount. Okay, so that's going to make our actual discount go down, which will make our carry value go up. So we're going to add that $774 to our price, or excuse me, our carry value, and we end up at 817,968. So we're going to do 817,968. We're going to multiply that by the, again, effective rate, which on this bond is 9%, so times the 9%. And then multiply that by 5 out of 12, because we're not going to hold this for a full 6 months at this point. We've only carried 5 of those 12, so you can't just take half of it. And when we multiply that out, let's see what we get. So take 817,968 times 0.09 times 5 divided by 12 gives us 30,000. And again, we're going to round $674. That's the amount of interest we would accrue as of December 31st. Now, our interest payable, there's a couple ways. We know it's 36 for 6 months. So really quick, you could just do 36 and multiply that by 5 out of 6, because we know that covers the 6-month period. Or you could go back and do the original formula. You could take the full face value, 900,000, times the stated rate of 8% times 5 out of 12. You would end up getting the same answer either way. So 2 ways you can calculate it. Just be careful and make sure that you don't calculate it incorrectly. And that would be 30,000. So again, the 36,000, multiply that by 5/6. Okay? Now, what's the difference there? Well, every time we record that interest, remember that as accrued, we do have to amortize a little bit of that discount. So we're going to hit the discount on bond payable, because that would actually reflect the proper carry value of the bond at this period of time. We would do 674. Because as we take this down, we want to make sure we calculate the right amount for the balance sheet. So what would we report on the balance sheet for this bond? So down here, let me just make a note of what you would report on this. So again, remember, we started out at a price of, a principal or discount of 82,806. Now, we've gone in and we've used 774 of it, and we've used 764. So if you calculate that out, take 82,806 minus 774 minus 674, you get 81,358, if I did my math right. Now remember, that account would be netted with our actual bond payable. So notice discounts have a debit balance, bond payable has a credit. So if you then net that out, we would subtract that from the 900, and I'm going to convert the sign here, but anyway, so if we take that out of the 900,000, what that tells us is at the end of the period we would carry our bond at 818,642, and that's the amount we would actually show on the balance sheet. So it's very important that we make sure we update this discount at the end of the period so that we properly reflect the carry value, what the actual debt is or the liability at that moment in time is on our bond. Okay, so that's the reason we have to do this, to make sure that we actually get that in and show that reflected at the proper value on our balance sheet. Alright, so now let's do this last interest payment. What's going to happen? And actually we're going to have to add a row, I do believe, but that's okay. So January 31st, we actually go in and record the interest. So again, there's a couple things going on here. One, interest payable, we're going to have to hit for the 36,000, or excuse me, the 30,000, because that's the amount that we accrued at the end of last period. We have to wipe that out. So now, what else do we need to record? Well, we need to record interest expense. So how much interest expense do we need to actually record? So let's go in and hit interest expense, and let's calculate that. Remember, we've done 5 months already, so we just need 1 additional month. So go back up here. This is our carry value. Remember, we want to calculate the interest for the full 6 months off of this full carry value, not this adjusted carry value, because we need to know the exact 6 months worth of actual interest off of that single carry value. So times that by the 0.09, and then times it by 1 out of 12, and that gives us 6,135. So that's the amount of interest expense we're actually going to record. Again, we haven't made the interest payment, so our carry value has not physically been reduced. So during that full 6 months, even though we did record a little bit of the amortization here, we want to make sure that every month in that 6-month period is always calculated based off of the carry value from the last interest payment. And that's the only way that you'll get the proper amount of interest expense. It's a 6-month period, okay? So we always want to do that. And you can check yourself. Do the 817,968, multiply that by the 9% effective rate times 6 over 12. And you should get 36, let's see, hold on. Double check myself. So 817,968, I hit a wrong key, times 9, and then multiply that by 6/12, or 1/2. And what we'll end up with is 36,808. Was that the total amount of interest that we recorded? So take the 30,674 and then add it to the 6,135. And sure enough, notice that the sum of those two equals that amount we expect. So the point of that, again, is just to make sure your carry value is consistent for that whole 6 months. We do not want to use this updated balance sheet number at that point to calculate the 1 month. All right, and then that brings us to our cash payment. Now, again, I apologize, you'll add a line there. Remember, every 6 months, no matter what, we're going to pay out the $36,000. So where does the difference go? Well, that's that 1 month of discount that we need to then go in and amortize. So we're going to hit that discount on bonds payable, and that leaves us with $135 in discount to amortize. So hopefully that gives you an example of how to record a bond when it crosses a year end.